So what is a book review? Well, you can consider a book review as a kind of scholarly dialogue. Scholarly in the fact that it's not informal writing, it's not an email, it's not a social media post, but it is an academic endeavor. And a dialogue in that it's a kind of conversation. It's a communication that takes place between you, the writer, the book itself, and the writer of the book that you are reviewing, and the audience who's reading your views, your assessment of the book that you have reviewed. So it's a dialogue. And this idea of dialogue is indeed helpful for the two main tasks of book reviews. The first of which is a summary. So the purpose of the summary is to demonstrate that you yourself are able to listen to the voice of the author of the book. That you have successfully demonstrated an ability to understand what the author actually said in a good way. That you have not misinterpreted or misread or bring your own presuppositions, your own biases to the interpretation task, but that you truly understand what the writer has to say. We call this reading with a sense of charity. At the same time, like all conversations, you not only listen to what another person has to say, but you also want to talk yourself. And so the aspect of speaking is the other part of the book review, which is a critical engagement in which you speak on the strengths and weaknesses of what you have just heard. So in summary, a book review involves two main aspects, the first of which is a summary, the second of which is a critical engagement. Now the summary is relatively easier because you're just trying to repeat what the author himself or herself has said. The critical engagement is a little bit more difficult because you are trying to critique and assess what the author has just said. So what is a book review? Once again, it's a summary and it's a critical analysis. And in many ways, this is what you've already done as you two have assessed each other's forum posts, in which, in many ways, your original post is a kind of summary of the material, as well as involving a kind of critical analysis as you consider some of the pros, the cons, the merits of what particular authors and each other have said. So the purpose of a summary is just to assess and to summarize, what is the author saying? Why did he or she write that book? What makes this particular book unique and different compared to similar or other books? For example, and in order for you to try to understand what the author has actually said, as the Adler book talks about, you really want to focus on the introduction of the book as well as the conclusion, because it provides a general overview and outline of what the book is trying to say. You want to consider the first and last paragraphs of each chapter, perhaps the first and last sentences of each paragraph, and so on. You also want to take a look at the table of contents because it provides a kind of inherent structure on how the author organizes the book and what each chapter does relative to the main argument of the entire book. And this is a very important suggestion, is check out other book reviews of the work in question, which provides examples and which provides what other people have said about this book as well. For example, let's say you decide you're going to write a book review on George Huntzinger's book, Reading Bart with Charity. And this particular Reading Bart with Charity has a unique thesis. And so we want to, but at the same time, the thesis of reading Bart with charity is you can say is in direct contrast and even contradicts what Bruce McCormick's book talks about. Both are secondary works on Karl Barth, but in a book review of one, you should probably compare it with another work. So a basic summary of the book: what is the author saying? Why did he or she write that book? What makes this unique and different compared to similar or other books? Number two, how is the book organized? What is the main purpose and argument of the book? How does the author make his or her argument? What are some of the tools? What are some of the methodologies? What's the field of study that the author belongs to? And focus on the role each chapter plays relative to the larger book. What tools, sources, methodologies does the author use? What are her ideological, theological, philosophical presuppositions? And it's really important to identify what kind of book is it. Is it a history book? Is it a poetry book? Is it a theology book? And of course, since our course is a theological class, all of our books will be theological. And so when we're doing a book review and we're summarizing the content of a particular book, we want to frame this book review within the context of the theological academy. And so how does this particular book compare with other theology books? If we're reviewing one book, is its thesis, how does its thesis compare to what other theses of other books have said? Does it follow along the mainstream, or does it contradict the mainstream view? What is the unique contribution that this particular book plays within the realm of the similar theological study? And perhaps as beginning theology students, you may feel as if you're not adequately prepared to compare it with the theological world in general. And in this instance, it would be very helpful for you to look at other book reviews in order to gain perspective on the theological guild as a whole. And in terms of the summary aspect, in the introduction, the author will usually tell the reader the purpose of the book, as well as what they will do with each chapter of the book and how each chapter fits with the main argument of the book. And so your task is to go through each chapter, read the whole book, and summarize what and how the author goes about making that argument. Noticing interesting aspects of the argument as well. And once again, reviewing and reading other book reviews will help. And how do we do that? If you go to the Fuller Library website and you search the book on the Fuller Library website, and you click on the left side, there's going to be a box that you can check that says articles, and there you're going to encounter various book reviews that have been written. So this is the summary aspect, and then the part B is a critical analysis. And so in terms of the composition, in a book review, probably you want a third to be a summary, and then you want 2/3 to be the critical analysis. Because the critical analysis is your views, your unique contribution to this book. Because in terms of the summary itself, there are plenty of book reviews out there that summarize what's being said. And so you really want to focus on how you and your theological imagination and your theological mind can make a unique contribution with the book in question. So in the critical analysis, you will provide a critical assessment of the strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons, provide an effective critique of what you describe in the summary. Because the first part of the book review is you describing what happens in the book. The second part of the book review is you assessing Is what the author writes good? Is it successful? Does it successfully do a good job in arguing and making its case? This is your unique contribution. In an age of information in which we can get anything at any time, 24 hours a day, the book review and the critical assessment portion is your unique contribution to this task. Because every single person has their own backgrounds, personal backgrounds, intellectual backgrounds. You can provide an assessment based on your perspective. How do we assess the strengths and weaknesses? Is it logical? Does it match what other scholars say? Do other scholars directly contradict what the author says? Does the author use credible sources? If they're making a strong argument, but the sources they use are not all that credible, then it's weak. When the author says A equals B because of C, does it follow or make sense? Does C match up with A? Does C match up with B? That's one way in which we would assess the strengths and the weaknesses. And another aspect of the critical book review is that it provides a constructive aspect as well. Once you assess the strengths and weaknesses of what the author does, you can also provide your own views on what would have been a better approach. What sources should they have used? What ideas, what logics, what insights can you provide in order to strengthen what the author tried to do? Or, based on what you provide, how does your view directly contradict or counteract what the book tries to say? Or, having read this particular book, how can you synthesize the information of this particular book that you're reviewing with maybe another book, combine them together to make an even larger and more constructive point? In many ways, the critical analysis is the exciting part of a book review. And as you read book reviews, different book reviews of the same book, it is really interesting in how different people, different scholars approach the reviewing task, because they all bring their own backgrounds and presuppositions and ideologies. How do you view this book from your background, your perspective, your experiences? And then you can also provide some scholarly evidence demonstrating your own perspective. Maybe the book you're reviewing comes from, say, the Presbyterian tradition, but you're not a Presbyterian. And maybe you're a Methodist, or maybe you're a Lutheran. And so you can provide, and let's say the book that you're reviewing is a Presbyterian perspective on, say, election or predestination. And then you can bring in a Lutheran theologian or a Methodist theologian, and how they would argue through this idea of election or predestination. And if you go on the Canvas page, I've provided a link to how one particular scholar has assessed VMK's book that you're reading as required for this course. And I'll also provide a video going through that review.